In this comparative study, I will explore the similarities and differences in the representation of mental illness in slasher films, using Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, 1960, and Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. There are two key similarities that both films have in terms of how they represent mental illness within the subgenre of the slasher movie. First is that they both take inspiration from the infamous case of the serial killer Ed Gein. Secondly, both films push the envelope in terms of how films represented the link between mental illness and murder, meaning that both films can be considered proto-slashers because, despite the term slasher movie not having been coined when either film was made, these two films were arguably key influences on the slasher movie craze of the late 70s and early 80s. Both Hitchcock and Hooper, despite never having met nor consciously aware of each other, took the case of Ed Gein as their inspirational starting point for their films. Gein was a notorious American serial killer whom killed both women and robbed graves. In both instances, Gein would mutilate the corpses and keep mementos such as body parts, as well as making furniture and lampshades out of bones and flesh. In Hitchcock's case, he became obsessed with Gein's psychopathy and the crimes he committed. Hitchcock was obsessed with murders and often attended trials of killers in his youth. By contrast, Hooper was inspired by a key question. How could it be that there are people out there in the world making lampshades out of people? Hitchcock's mindset during the filming of Psycho is well realised in Hitchcock, the 2012 film, where he is represented as having an imaginary conversation with Ed Gein himself. Hitchcock often said that he would do this to get into the motivation of the characters in his films. In doing this, it is arguably unavoidable that a sense of sympathy would be present between filmmaker and subject, no matter how abhorrent the person whom is the subject. This implicit sense of sympathy, and indeed morbid fascination with Ed Gein, is something both Hitchcock and Hooper seemed to share. Both filmmakers made a point of signposting to their respective audiences the reluctance of their killers, whom, it is implied, are fashioned on the notorious sheepishness of Gein upon his arrest. Both Hitchcock and Hooper must have been confounded in trying to match the heinous crimes with the awkward and somewhat vulnerable killer, Gein himself. In the case of Psycho, the original audience had no idea that Norman was the killer by the end of the film. This meant the key scene where Norman discovers Marion's body, is shocked, but then cleans up the murder scene, changes its meaning only upon repeat viewings. The intended retrospective meaning an audience can get from this scene is that Norman is being performative in his shock upon discovering the body of Marion Crane in the shower. Norman actively disassociates himself from what he himself has done. This is a key symptom of many psychopathic killers. Hitchcock, other than preserving the film's twist ending, clearly understood the psychological disassociation sometimes felt between serial killers and their crimes. A similar scene occurs in Texas Chainsaw Massacre when that film's Ed Gein alter ego, Leatherface, kills the third teen who enters his house. Upon killing this third teen, Leatherface begins to panic, groaning whilst running around the house shutting curtains. He is then seen sitting down and trying to calm himself. The camera focuses on his confused face.